The Roman Empire is often remembered for its grandeur, arches, columns, togas, and triumphs. But beneath all that marble and marble-faced virtue lay a culture tangled in contradictions, especially when it came to sex, marriage, and control. Roman society was obsessed with order. Hierarchies ruled everything, from the Senate to the street corner. And nowhere were those hierarchies more personal, more volatile, and more policed than in the Roman home. In Rome, sex was never just sex. It was a performance of status, a ritual of dominance, a constant unspoken contract that reaffirmed who had power and who was allowed to desire whom. And that's where the trouble began. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this gentle unraveling of ancient contradictions, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support more sleepy survival stories like this one. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know which corner of the world we're drifting into history from. Now, let's begin, slowly. Because in Rome, a man's desire was his right, but a woman's, that was a matter of life or death. A man could cheat, but a woman couldn't desire. The Roman household, the domus, was built on the principle of patria potestas, the power of the father. This was not just symbolic. The pater familias, or male head of household, legally owned his children, his slaves, his property, and in many ways, his wife. He could kill, disown, or punish those under his power. And yes, he could sleep with whoever he liked, so long as they weren't another man's wife. Roman morality didn't forbid male infidelity, it simply demanded that it be socially acceptable infidelity. Mistresses were fine, prostitutes even better, slaves expected. But a married woman of respectable status, that was a line even a libertine was warned not to cross. Roman men were allowed appetite. Roman women were not allowed curiosity. Why chastity was political? A Roman woman's body was not just hers. It was her father's reputation, her husband's pride, and her children's legitimacy. Any question of adultery didn't just create gossip, it cast doubt on inheritance, alliances, and bloodlines. Virginity before marriage was a legal expectation. Chastity during marriage was a civic duty. And so the punishment for adultery was brutal for women. They could be banished, disowned, or even killed by their own fathers or husbands with the law's quiet approval. A man, by contrast, might receive a warning, or applause, or another drink. How did they justify this? It wasn't hidden. It wasn't considered hypocrisy. It was considered Roman virtue. Philosophers, lawmakers, and poets agreed. Men had natural desires that must be managed, but women were supposed to be pudica, modest, passive, pure. So while male desire was seen as a strength to be moderated, female desire was viewed as a threat to be extinguished. And when that desire slipped through, when a woman acted on her passions, society responded not with therapy, but with exile, or worse. Was anyone actually watching? Yes, and constantly. Roman women were watched from the moment they married, often from the moment they were born. Their letters could be intercepted, their maids could be questioned, their clothing was coded, their steps were counted. A woman's reputation could be destroyed by a rumor, and unlike men, whose mistakes could be reshaped into cleverness, a woman's fall of grace was usually permanent and publicly humiliating. Adulterous women were sometimes forced to parade through the street, shaved, stripped, or branded, while their male lovers, if named at all, paid a fine, if that. Why did the law care so much? Because Rome was built on control, and sex was one of its most useful tools. By legislating desire, by turning marriage into a legal contract of loyalty and surveillance, the Roman state controlled reproduction, inheritance, and social order. Every family was a small kingdom, and every kingdom needed rules. These rules weren't whispered in the back rooms, they were engraved in law. The Lex Julia, passed by Augustus around 18 BCE, criminalized adultery and made it the business of the state. Adultery wasn't just a moral failing, it became a public crime. A man could bring charges against his own wife, and if he didn't, the state could prosecute her instead. Yes, even in private matters, Rome wanted the final word. But did women ever get away with it? Yes and no. Some wealthy women found ways to navigate the rules. Some powerful families protected their daughters through influence. Some secrets stayed secret. But the threat of punishment always hung in the air. Even whispers could be deadly. And while some men broke rules with impunity, women often paid for merely appearing to do so. What was it like to be married in Rome? If you were a man, empowering. If you were a woman, complicated. Roman marriages were often arranged, practical, and highly unequal. The ideal Roman wife was loyal, silent, fertile, and invisible. If she was witty, it had to be charming. If she was beautiful, it had to be modest. If she was intelligent, it had to be hidden. But if her husband cheated, she was expected to bear it. If she cheated, she was expected to disappear. Conclusion: power, punishment, and pretending not to see. So what did Rome really think about sex? It thought it was useful. It thought it was political. It thought it should be controlled, but only when necessary. The double standard wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the system. And so we begin our slow descent into this world, not of romantic tragedy, but of power wrapped in virtue, punishment hidden in law, and marriages where only one partner was truly free. Let's keep walking, because what comes next isn't just scandal, it's survival. What did marriage really mean to a Roman woman? For the average Roman woman, marriage wasn't about romance. It wasn't even really about companionship. It was a contract, a transaction, a carefully managed handover in which she moved almost seamlessly from being the property of her father to becoming the property of her husband. There were expectations, laws, rituals, and silence, but rarely was there freedom. So what did it really mean, day to day, to be a married woman in ancient Rome? And how did this role, so praised in poetry, idealized in stone, and feared in practice, define whether she lived with honor or died with shame? Let's drift back and find out. From girl to wife, the handing over of a body. In the early Republic, Roman daughters were subject to the absolute control of their fathers under patria potestas. They couldn't choose whom to marry, when to marry, or whether to marry. That decision belonged to the pater familias, the head of the family. Love was not part of the equation. Marriage was arranged for politics, alliances, land, money, and legacy. And when it happened, the transition was formal, marked by ceremony, law, and the surrender of the woman to a new household. But even this transfer came in types. There were two main forms of Roman marriage for respectable citizens, cum manu and sine manu. Let's go gently through them. Cum manu, with hand marriage. In cum manu marriage, the woman passed directly into the authority of her husband, as if adopted by him. She was no longer legally tied to her birth family. She became part of her husband's family and was treated like a daughter in his household, technically even losing rights to inherit from her biological father. She became subject to the will of the new paterfamilias, most often her husband or her father-in-law. In many ways, she became doubly voiceless. Not only had she left the family that raised her, but she now had no legal claim to return. She belonged to her husband's household. Literally. Sine manu, without hand marriage. In sine manu marriages, which became more common in the later Republic and imperial periods, a woman remained under the authority of her father, even after marrying. This gave her more legal independence, at least in theory. She could inherit from her family, own property, and sometimes even manage her own finances. It sounds progressive, until you realize she was still not truly autonomous. She still couldn't vote, hold office, or make legal decisions without a male guardian, tutor. Her marriage might offer her softer chains, but chains they remained. And whether under manus or not, her duty was clear: loyalty, silence, fertility. The ideal Roman wife, pudica, obedient and invisible. Literature, law, and social custom upheld a single image of the perfect Roman wife. Pudica, the Latin term for modesty, chastity, and restraint. She was expected to avoid luxury, avoid public opinion, avoid independent thought, and most of all, avoid suspicion. She was to be loyal to her husband's name, bear his children, and die with dignity if asked to. Even her clothing reflected this image. The stola, the long garment worn by respectable married women, was a visual statement of her purity. It was loose, draping, and modest. No jewelry, no vibrant dye, no perfume, no eye contact with strangers in the street. A woman who wore bold colors or spoke loudly in public risked being mistaken for something worse than disrespectable. She might be mistaken for independent. Surveillance in the home. Who was watching her? Everyone. Her husband, her slaves, her neighbors, her children, even the law. In elite households, she might live with dozens of slaves, and any one of them could be questioned or tortured if the paterfamilias suspected his wife of unfaithfulness. The more wealth she had, the less privacy she had. And if she was poor, then she lived close to the street, in rooms where walls didn't muffle sound. In a society obsessed with honor and shame, even the creak of a floorboard could become gossip. A married woman's day: work, weaving, and watching her step. Most Roman women didn't spend their days reclining on couches or attending banquets. Their daily life was routine, modest, and often tedious. She woke up early to oversee the household. She might manage slaves, distribute food, prepare for family rituals, and supervise the education of children. In lower-class homes, she worked alongside her husband, tending market stalls, weaving cloth, grinding grain. The ideal Roman woman was useful, but not too visible. She was knowledgeable, but not outspoken. She was industrious, but never ambitious. Her silence was a symbol of virtue, and her fate always tied to how well she upheld that image. Desire without permission, the risk of feeling. What happened if a Roman wife felt desire? What if she longed for affection, for passion, for something outside the tight circle of duty? The answer was simple. She couldn't act on it. Even to speak of such feelings might stain her reputation. Poets like Ovid told tales of forbidden love, clever seductions, and secret trysts, but the women in those stories were either fictional or punished. Real Roman wives were expected to suppress desire.
Only their husbands were allowed that privilege, and if they crossed the line, they faced consequences far beyond shame. Adultery, from private disgrace to public crime. Before Augustus's reforms, adultery was a private family matter, dealt with behind closed doors, often through quiet exile or family negotiation. But the Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis, passed in 18 BC, changed that. Now adultery was a crime, and not just a crime against the family, but against the state. A husband could legally charge his wife with adultery. If he didn't, her father could, and if neither did, any Roman citizen could file a report. Punishment included banishment to an island, loss of dowry, public disgrace, and even death, especially in early Republican times. Meanwhile, a husband who cheated with a prostitute, slave, or freedwoman faced a lecture, or nothing, because, legally speaking, a man couldn't be adulterous unless the woman he slept with was married to another man of equal status. Even then, enforcement was flexible, if you were rich. Could love exist in these marriages? Sometimes, yes. Some Roman letters and epitaphs suggest deep affection between spouses. In rare cases, husbands praised their wives for kindness, intelligence, and loyalty, not just modesty. But those were exceptions. Love was not the goal. Control was. Marriage existed to produce heirs, cement alliances, and preserve wealth. Women who were loved were lucky. Women who were powerful were rare. Conclusion: marriage as a mirror of Rome itself. So what did marriage really mean for a Roman woman? It meant being watched, weighed, and measured. It meant living under laws that expected perfection but never offered protection. It meant silence, sacrifice, and fear of exile if she ever slipped. Marriage was not a partnership, it was a hierarchy. And in this hierarchy, a man's failure could be forgiven, but a woman's mistake, that was fatal. Let's keep walking, because next we'll ask the question that really turns stomachs. What happened when a woman broke the rules?
What happened when a woman broke the rules? A Roman woman's world was made of rules, rules written in law, rules whispered through generations, rules carved in marble and enforced by men in togas who never asked her what she wanted. But what if she broke those rules? What if she desired something outside her husband's reach? What if she disobeyed? What if she loved the wrong man or dared to live on her own terms? Well, the empire had answers, and they were not kind. Let's walk softly now through the consequences, because this wasn't just social gossip, it was survival. To be accused was to be judged. For a Roman woman, the mere accusation of infidelitas, infidelity, could unravel her life. Evidence wasn't always necessary. Suspicion could be enough. In a culture where virtus, male virtue, was expressed through action and conquest, a woman's virtue was measured in passivity. And that meant that any action, any whisper of movement outside her expected bounds was dangerous. Leaving the home without permission, wearing bright clothing, being seen laughing too freely in public, were worse, being caught alone with another man. Even these small ruptures could ignite accusation. And once the flames started, The law was there to fan them. The lex Julia, when gossip became legal. The lex Julia de adulteris coercendis, passed by Emperor Augustus in 18 BCE, made adultery a public crime, not a private matter. It was part of his sweeping moral reforms designed to restore traditional values, but in practice it became a tool of surveillance and control, especially of women. The law gave men the right, and sometimes the duty, to prosecute their own wives for adultery. If a husband failed to act, the woman's father could take over. If he refused, any Roman citizen could step in. The punishment? Exile, loss of dowry, social death, and in some periods, literal death. A convicted woman could be sent to a barren island, stripped of wealth and name, while the man she slept with might receive a lighter sentence or none at all. Unless, of course, he touched someone else's wife without permission. Then it became about property, not morality. Julia the Elder, the emperor's own daughter, publicly shamed. Even the most powerful women weren't safe. Julia the Elder, daughter of Augustus himself, was exiled in disgrace for alleged adultery, publicly humiliated, banished to a remote island with no visitors, no wine, no letters. She was accused not only of sleeping with many men, but of doing so in the forum, under the very nose of Roman virtue. Whether these claims were true or politically motivated doesn't matter. Her fate was real, and her name, once royal, became a cautionary tale whispered to every young Roman bride. Even an emperor's daughter could be destroyed. So what chance did a merchant's wife have? Public shame as punishment. Legal consequences weren't the only punishment. There was also the ritual of humiliation. Some adulterous women, especially from elite families, were paraded through the streets, heads shaved, clothing torn, faces marked with soot. This wasn't required by law, but it was a social theater of shame, a public unmaking of identity. Roman society believed that a woman who lost her modesty also lost her name, and that loss had to be witnessed. Domestic punishment, quiet, brutal, and legal. While the lex Julia provided a legal route, many Roman men preferred to handle things quietly, behind stone doors, without trial. A pater familias still held terrifying rights over those in his household. He could beat a disobedient wife. He could confine her. He could starve her. In some periods, he could even kill her with little or no legal consequence if her actions brought dishonor to the family. No jury, no appeal, just silence. A woman's word meant little. If a woman claimed innocence, she was often ignored. If she claimed coercion, she might be blamed. If she accused a man of assault, she was asked what she was wearing, why she was alone, why she wasn't at home. Sound familiar? Yes, some things haven't changed as much as we like to pretend. Children were taken from her. A woman convicted of adultery could lose more than her status. She could lose her children. Roman law allowed husbands to disown their wives and take full custody. The children would be raised in the husband's household, and the mother would be erased from their lives. To Roman law, she had failed her role as a mater familias, the moral mother of the home, and failure was not allowed. But what if she was rich or clever? Wealth helped. Some elite women used political influence, bribes, and carefully staged marriages to escape prosecution. Others fled the city before charges could be brought. Some entered voluntary exile, slipping away before being pushed. Clever women learned to hide lovers, forge letters, and pay off witnesses,
but they lived in fear, because Rome had long memory and short mercy. Even an innocent woman could become guilty in the eyes of a rival with enough connections. The role of slaves in scandal. Enslaved people were often pulled into these dramas. A wife's maid could be questioned under torture. Her doorman could be blamed for letting a visitor in. Her scribe might be forced to hand over private letters. Slaves had no legal protection, and their testimony was considered valid, especially when it confirmed a woman's guilt. In some cases, slaves were executed along with the convicted woman. Their crime? Knowing too much. Why did men get away with it? Because Roman masculinity wasn't about fidelity. It was about dominance. A Roman man could sleep with prostitutes, slaves, and concubines as long as they were of lower status. His pleasure didn't threaten social order. Hers did. Her body was a boundary line, a locked gate, a symbolic fortress of honor. When she crossed it, the entire foundation of Roman family and inheritance law trembled. At least, that's how they told the story. Did any women fight back? Yes. Some women, especially in the late empire, began asserting more independence. They ran businesses, they bought land, some lived without husbands at all. But they were still vulnerable to slander. A woman who walked confidently alone was called meretrix, prostitute. A woman who dressed too well was accused of seducing. A woman who ignored a man's attention could be labeled cold or suspected of hiding something. Resistance was possible, but costly. Conclusion: breaking the rules meant breaking yourself. In Rome, a woman who broke the rules was not reformed. She was erased. Her name was scratched from the family line. Her memory was hidden in shame. Her tomb might be left unmarked. Adultery wasn't about morality. It was about control. And when control slipped, when a woman stepped outside her husband's narrative, the punishment was swift. Because Rome loved rules, and it loved order, and it loved men more than it ever loved justice. Let's keep walking. Next, we ask, how did this terrifying imbalance play out in daily Roman life? What did wives live with? What did husbands expect? In Section 4, we'll drift into the delicate, quiet mechanics of power and passion and punishment. Sleep softly, and I'll meet you there.
What was life like for a Roman wife, even without scandal? So far, we've wandered through the rules, the punishments, the whispered threats that hovered around every Roman woman. But what about the millions of wives who didn't break the rules? What about the women who stayed loyal, modest, invisible, and still lived their entire lives under the weight of expectations they never wrote? What was it like, day after day, to be a good Roman wife? The answer might surprise you, because even when scandal didn't erupt, survival wasn't gentle. It was quiet, routine, tightly choreographed, and always under watchful eyes. Let's step softly into that daily life now. Let's wake beside her. Morning, rituals of respectability. The day for a respectable Roman wife began just after sunrise. There were no servants bringing her breakfast in bed, no lounging around in a marble atrium. Unless she was married into great wealth, she rose before the light reached the city's high walls. Her first duty was the lararium, the household shrine, She lit incense and offered a brief prayer to the household gods, asking for safety, protection, and fertility. Always fertility. Rome didn't want wives. Rome wanted mothers. She might whisper names of ancestors, of gods, of her own children if she had them. Then she'd turn to the kitchen, or to the servants, or to the open courtyard where her day quietly unfolded. In poorer homes she did everything herself. In wealthier ones she directed others. But in all of them her tasks were the same. Manage the food, manage the slaves, manage the laundry. Stay quiet. Clothing herself in modesty. Roman fashion was full of symbolism. A married woman's stola, a long draped garment, marked her status. Its folds were modest, its colors subdued, pale browns, soft reds, linen whites. The fabric whispered virtue. No low necklines, no perfume, no gold trim unless she was elite. Her hair was tightly tied, often braided. In the Republic, simpler styles were the norm. In the Empire, hairstyles grew elaborate, sculpted with pins and sometimes beeswax. But even then, her face had to say, "I am respectable, I am obedient, I am married." To appear otherwise, even by accident, was to invite judgment. And judgment came swiftly. The social landscape, walls that watched. Though Roman women didn't have legal power, they did have social power, but only within narrow limits. A wife might attend a dinner party, walk to the market, visit a temple, or speak to her husband's clients, but always with careful decorum. She walked with her head slightly bowed. She did not look men directly in the eye. She did not smile too brightly. She did not speak unless spoken to. Even at home she performed virtue. The walls watched, the slaves whispered, and above it all, her husband's honor was constantly being weighed by her behavior. The invisible labor of the Roman matrone. In many Roman households, especially among the middle class, the wife served as chief operations officer of the home. She managed the slaves, counted grain, measured wool, bought olive oil, bargained at the market, ordered sandals to be mended, oversaw the education of children. She was not idle, she was not passive, but she was unacknowledged. Roman writers praised wives for being quiet as shadows, industrious like bees, and present only in their duties. To be seen too much was shameful. To be too competent was threatening. The line was impossibly narrow. Motherhood, the burden of survival. Children were everything. Rome needed new citizens, new soldiers, new voters. But childbirth was deadly, especially for the mother. A wife was expected to produce multiple children. If they died, as many did, she was expected to keep trying. There were no painkillers, no antibiotics, just midwives, superstition, and fate. And if she failed to conceive, well, her value dropped sharply. Her husband could divorce her for infertility. Her own family might urge him to do so. The shame would be hers, not his. And if she birthed daughters, well, she tried again. Friendship was dangerous. Roman wives rarely had female friendships as we understand them today. If she visited a neighbor too often, people gossiped. If she laughed too freely with a friend's husband, she was suspect. If she spent too much time outside, she was called a mulier vaga, a wandering woman, not a compliment. So most women kept friendships quiet, through whispered letters, through shared work, through brief glances in the market. And when they found true friendship, it was sacred, but also risky. Her husband's world, business, banquets, and brothels. Meanwhile, her husband was everywhere. He rose early to speak with clients, walked the streets freely, dined with friends, voted in elections, argued in courtrooms, and visited lupenaria, brothels, if he desired. No one questioned him. He might praise his wife as a goddess at home and spend the evening with a courtesan. This was considered normal. Roman law did not see this as betrayal. To cheat on a wife was a social joke. To cheat as a wife was a death sentence. Her world was made of waiting. Waiting for his return. Waiting for his moods.
waiting to see if she would bear a child, waiting to hear if her reputation had survived the latest whisper. She waited at windows, waited through storms, waited through illness, waited through childbirths and funerals. Her name might never be recorded, but her life carried the weight of an entire civilization's demands. Even in wealth, never safe. Let's not imagine that being rich made everything easier. Elite Roman wives had more to manage, more slaves, more homes, more politics. They hosted dinners, planned rituals, and curated appearances. They were symbols of their husband's honor, and if they slipped, they were destroyed louder. The higher your marble pedestal, the harder the fall. The silent power of a good reputation. Still, within the confines of obedience, some women found influence. A wife with an impeccable reputation could protect her family from scandal. She could negotiate marriages, advise on clients, and preserve her children's legacy. Some became matriarchs of vast families, quiet queens of domestic strategy. They could not vote, they could not plead in court, but they could whisper. And in Rome, a well-timed whisper was often more dangerous than a sword. So what was it really like? It was not constant fear, nor constant misery, but it was never freedom. It was waking each morning to a set of invisible lines you could not cross, and spending the day navigating them. It was holding love, loss, pain, and pride in silence, because even your emotions belonged to your husband. To be a Roman wife, even a good one, was to live in a performance, a long, slow play of virtue. No script, no applause, just the constant hope that no one would pull back the curtain. Let's walk forward, because in the next section we ask, how did Roman men justify this brutal imbalance?
How did Roman men justify their double standards? So far, we've walked alongside the silent burdens of Roman wives through expectations, fears, and quiet performances of obedience. But now, let's shift. Let's turn to the ones writing the rules. Let's sit quietly in the shadowed study of a Roman senator, listening to the scratch of his stylus as he drafts another decree about modesty, and then steps out to his favorite brothel by moonlight. Why was this double standard so thoroughly accepted in Rome? Why could a man flaunt his mistresses while a woman was exiled for the wrong glance? Was this hypocrisy or something worse? Let's drift slowly through the layers of Roman logic, the tangled myths, moral justifications, and unspoken fears that built a world where male pleasure was power and female virtue was silence. Masculinity was defined by conquest. To understand Roman gender politics, we must first understand how Rome defined masculinity. It wasn't about kindness or wisdom or fidelity. It was about domination. The Roman ideal of manhood, virtus, was rooted in control. A man showed strength by conquering others, whether in battle, politics, or the bedroom. To dominate was honorable. To be dominated by others was shameful. In sex, this translated to a strict active-passive binary. A real man took the active role. A woman, slave, or even another man, if he was the passive partner, could be used for pleasure because they were beneath him. The logic was simple, brutal, and endlessly repeated. He dominates, she submits. That's nature, that's law, that's Rome.
Sex was not about love, it was about hierarchy. A Roman man could legally sleep with female prostitutes, male prostitutes, slaves of any gender, courtesans, concubines, as long as those partners were lower in status and not another citizen's wife or daughter. If a Roman man slept with a married woman, it was considered adulterum, a serious offense. But if he slept with his own slaves or anyone outside of marriageable class, it was often ignored or even celebrated, because it wasn't about cheating, it was about not challenging another man's property. His wife was sacred. Other people's bodies were recreational. Marriage was for legitimacy, not love. A Roman marriage wasn't expected to be romantic, it was expected to be useful. Elite Roman men married to produce heirs, make political alliances, and secure dowries. Their wives were not expected to fulfill their emotional or sexual needs. Those needs were met elsewhere. A man might love his mistress. He might raise children with a slave. He might attend brothels regularly. None of this was seen as shameful. In fact, Roman literature is filled with bawdy tales of male escapades, told with laughter, not guilt. Meanwhile, female infidelity was described in terms of filth, shame, and pollution. A cheating wife threatened lineage. A cheating husband did not. The legal system reinforced the double standard. Roman law reflected this imbalance. We've already discussed the lex Julia, which criminalized female adultery but left male infidelity largely untouched. But deeper still, Roman law treated women as legal minors. Under the manos system, a woman was under the authority of her father or husband. She could not vote, she could not hold office, she could not represent herself in court. So when accused of sexual misconduct, she had almost no defense. The legal system wasn't built to protect her. It was built to protect male status, especially property, inheritance, and reputation. If a woman threatened those things by loving the wrong man, she was swiftly erased. Philosophers and poets played along. Roman intellectuals loved to dress patriarchy in poetry. Philosopher Seneca wrote that a wife should be like a mirror, present, silent, reflecting only her husband's virtue. Poet Juvenal warned men not to trust women with opinions or education, claiming they would soon be unfaithful. Ovid in Ars Amatoria gave men tips for seduction, including how to manipulate a married woman without getting caught. Even when these writers criticized moral decay, they rarely questioned male privilege. Instead, they romanticized the mistress, demonized the wife, and laughed at the brothel. This wasn't just cultural, it was literary. Roman men read their excuses in scrolls and called it wisdom. Women who fought back were mocked or feared. Some Roman women resisted. They used coded language, subversive fashion, or quiet rebellions. Some challenged their husbands publicly. A few became poets or philosophers themselves, but most were ridiculed. The term mulier virtilis, manly woman, was hurled at women who dared to speak in public or defy convention. It wasn't a compliment. It meant unnatural, disgusting, dangerous. Roman satire was brutal toward bold women. They were called unsexed, unholy, untrustworthy. Men feared them and painted them as monsters because they exposed the lie. The fear beneath it all, inheritance and control. Why did all this matter so much? Because Roman society was obsessed with lineage. A legitimate son meant a secure inheritance. A loyal wife meant a trusted bloodline. A family name was a currency, and women were the vault that guarded it. A cheating husband did not threaten this system. A cheating wife did. So the laws, the culture, the philosophy, it all bent toward preserving patrilineal certainty. even at the cost of fairness, even at the cost of lives. Rome didn't want justice, it wanted order. At its core, Rome wasn't driven by morality, it was driven by stability. A wife's fidelity wasn't just a personal matter, it was a public concern. Her body held the future of the state, her silence maintained peace. And if that peace required cruelty, exile, or death, so be it. Because Rome believed in law, legacy, and hierarchy more than it ever believed in love. Conclusion. The justifications were hollow but effective. So how did Roman men justify it? Through power, through myth, through law, through fear. They told themselves that masculinity meant dominance, that women were weaker, that society depended on female modesty and male indulgence. And when those stories were told often enough, they became truth. Truth that backed by force, truth carved into marble, truth passed down in silence. We still carry pieces of that truth today in old laws, old sayings, old habits that echo with ancient injustice. But don't worry, dear listener. We'll keep unearthing it, gently, one whisper at a time. In Section 6, we'll explore what happened behind closed doors, the hidden world of Roman brothels, courtesans, and how the same empire that punished wives glorified sex for sale. Sleep softly until then.
What did Roman brothels reveal about sex and power? Let's go somewhere no respectable Roman wife was allowed to go. We're walking into a dim stone corridor now. The air smells like lamp oil and old linen. You can hear muffled laughter, footsteps on marble, and voices. Dozens of them. Men talking in low casual tones, women murmuring in practiced rhythm. A door creaks open, and the sharp scent of perfume wafts through. We are entering a Roman brothel, but not for pleasure, for understanding. Because to truly grasp the dark hypocrisy of Roman gender roles, we have to look beyond palaces and tribunals. We have to step into the places where Rome's double standards became not just law, but ritual. This isn't about titillation, it's about power. A lupanar was a machine, not a mystery. In ancient Rome, brothels were called lupanaria, literally wolf dens. There was no secrecy about them. They were marked with carvings, crude images of phalluses pointing toward the entrance, sometimes even mosaics labeled with prices. Inside, narrow rooms flanked small corridors, stone beds, thin cloth curtains, crude wall art. They weren't luxurious, they weren't romantic, they were mechanical. Each room designed for rapid turnover, each woman expected to serve dozens of men in a day. And yet Roman men, senators, shopkeepers, soldiers, flocked to them. Because here no virtue was expected, no laws could be broken. The power they wielded outside the walls, it amplified here. The women weren't free, not even close. Despite Rome's obsession with conquest, brothel women were not praised. They were slaves, or former slaves, or freed women with nowhere else to go. They had no legal protection, no recourse against abuse, no right to refuse a customer. Many were trafficked, sold into the profession as children,
and even those who worked independently had to register as prostitutes under the law, permanently marking them as outside respectable society. Once you were labeled meretrix, you couldn't be clean again. You couldn't marry a senator. You couldn't testify in court. You couldn't even inherit money in some cases. It didn't matter how much you earned. You were outside the system. Sex was a commodity, but also a language. Roman brothels weren't just spaces for sex, they were theaters of control. Men could choose from a menu of acts. Women were expected to perform without hesitation. But it wasn't just about physical pleasure. It was about displaying dominance. Every choice, every transaction was a reflection of male status. A senator who paid more could boast of exclusive rights. A soldier could demand whatever act he pleased so long as he had a coin. For some, the act of paying was more erotic than the act itself. Sex became a language, and the words were all written by men. The walls told stories, graffiti of ownership. One of the most striking features of Pompeii's brothels is the graffiti. Visitors carved and painted messages on the walls. Some were simple boasts. I was here. I had Flavia, she was amazing. Others were more vulgar. Many included the names of women, prices, preferences. Some even recorded arguments between clients over who had the rights to a particular woman. The walls became a chorus of anonymous voices claiming power over female bodies. No love, no regret, just transactions etched into stone. And the women? They didn't leave messages. They weren't allowed to. Respectable men loved brothels and pretended not to. Here's the strange thing. While Roman culture obsessed over female chastity, it celebrated male indulgence. Writers like Ovid joked about brothel visits. Graffiti mocked friends who couldn't last or paid too much. And public figures, even emperors, were known to visit lupernaria regularly. But they never admitted it. A Roman senator might pass laws to restore public morality while secretly visiting the same brothel he condemned. He might ban his wife from attending the theater, but hire a dancer from the same stage to meet him in secret. This wasn't contradiction. It was performance. Male respectability was never about abstaining. It was about appearing in control, even in sin. Courtesans were a different game altogether. Not all sex workers lived in brothels. Some were courtesans, educated, witty, even fashionable women who served wealthy clients privately. They weren't necessarily free, but they were often more protected. Some had wealthy patrons. Some influenced politics. A few became famous. But they still existed outside respectability. A man might fall in love with a courtesan. He might father children with her. He might write poems about her beauty. But he would never marry her. Not without disgrace. She was a fantasy, not a wife. Did these women have power? Some did. Quietly. Despite the bleakness, there were slivers of resistance. Some brothel workers built informal networks, protecting each other from abuse. Some saved money and bought their freedom. Some became madams, managing others. A few even gained enough wealth to retire in comfort, though never with full rights. Their names are largely lost to history, but their survival mattered. They navigated a system stacked against them, using wit, endurance, and sometimes even affection to stay alive. They couldn't write the rules, but they bent them whenever they could. Brothels were a mirror and a weapon. To understand Roman brothels is to understand Rome itself. These places weren't hidden. They were sanctioned, normalized, even celebrated. They told Roman men that domination was natural, that bodies could be bought, that pleasure was a right, but only for them. And they told Roman women, especially wives, that your body is not yours. If it is modest, it belongs to your husband. If it is used, it belongs to no one. This was the logic of empire, carved in flesh. The real lesson: Rome never separated sex from status. In Rome, sex was never private. It was political. A man's appetite proved his strength. A woman's restraint proved her value. And a brothel was where that entire equation played out day after day. It didn't matter how many bodies passed through. What mattered was that none of them belonged to the women themselves. Conclusion: the brothel wasn't hidden, it was the foundation. Roman brothels weren't a shameful secret, they were a cornerstone of the system. They helped maintain the illusion that Rome was moral, ordered, balanced, while enabling the very inequalities it pretended to police. In a city obsessed with law, the brothel existed outside of it. In a world obsessed with honor, it turned women into currency. So when we ask why Roman husbands could cheat, but wives died for it, the answer is carved into those stone walls. Because it was never about morality. It was about control. And nowhere was control more visible than in the red-lit corridors where nobody said no, because nobody could. In Section 7, we'll ask a darker question. What happened when a Roman wife was accused of cheating, even if she was innocent?
What happened when a Roman wife was accused of cheating, even if she was innocent? You hear the knock before dawn. It echoes softly through the atrium, past the sleeping servants, past the faint glow of the household altar, and settles heavily in your chest. You are the wife of a Roman citizen, and someone has accused you of adultery. You don't know who, you don't know why, but it doesn't matter. Because in ancient Rome, being accused of cheating wasn't just a scandal, it was a death sentence in waiting. Let's step inside this cold, slow nightmare and gently unpack what really happened when a Roman wife was accused of betrayal, whether she was guilty or not. First, the accusation itself was a weapon. Adultery accusations didn't need solid proof. Under the Lex Julia de Adulteriis Coercendis, a law introduced by Augustus in 18 BCE, any husband who suspected his wife of infidelity was legally obligated to report her or face punishment himself. Yes, you heard that right. If a man failed to denounce his wife's alleged affair, he could be charged with pimping. His silence was interpreted as consent. So whether the evidence was real, whispered, invented, or political didn't matter. If your neighbor saw a man enter your home at the wrong hour, if a rival wanted you out of the picture, if your husband needed a legal reason to remarry, an accusation could be launched, and once launched, it could not be taken back. The accused woman had no real defense. Roman wives had no right to legal representation in these cases, no opportunity to confront accusers, no impartial jury. Instead, the case was typically judged by male family members or a panel of male magistrates, many of whom had personal ties to the husband. Evidence could be as weak as a rumor, or a servant's testimony under torture, or a forged letter. And if you tried to defend yourself, that too was dangerous. A woman who spoke too boldly, who showed emotion, who broke her silence, was seen as unchaste. Silence was seen as virtue, but silence also meant you could not save yourself.
Your father might be forced to punish you himself. In a cruel twist of Roman morality, the law allowed a woman's father to kill her if he caught her in the act of adultery in his home. This was seen as protecting the family's honor. Fathers who failed to act swiftly might lose social standing. They might even face legal consequences for showing too much mercy. Imagine a daughter suspected of infidelity, dragged home by force, judged by the very man who raised her. It wasn't about justice, it was about symbolic cleanliness, removing the stain from the family name by any means necessary. Punishment varied, but it was always destructive. If the accusation succeeded, and it usually did, the punishments were harsh and humiliating. Exile to a desolate island, often shared with the accused lover, confiscation of property and dowry, social erasure, being legally labeled as an adulteress. In some cases, execution, especially under older customs or in rural regions still practicing honor killings. Even exile was not just relocation. It was banishment from every part of your life, family, wealth, children, reputation. You became legally untouchable. No decent Roman could speak your name without shame. You were alive, but disappeared. Your children were tainted too. Roman obsession with bloodlines meant that your infidelity, real or not, poisoned more than your name. Your children might be declared illegitimate, your daughters unmarriageable, your sons unable to inherit titles or land. Some husbands even used false accusations as a weapon to disinherit their wives' children, especially in second marriages. In Rome, motherhood was sacred, but only when controlled. The moment a woman's loyalty was questioned, her children suffered for it, even if they were innocent, even if they were his. Meanwhile, the Roman man who accused you could walk away clean. And what about the Roman man who accused you? He didn't need proof. If he succeeded, he gained control of your dowry, legal permission to remarry, social credit for defending morality. If he failed, which was rare, he faced minimal consequences, a fine perhaps, some social embarrassment, but no exile, no label, no erasure. He could move on. You could not. Some women tried to fight back. They disappeared. A few Roman women wrote secret letters to sympathetic family members. Some fled before trial. Some used bribes or favors to delay judgment. But Rome's system wasn't built for resistance. A woman who fought the accusation was called hysterical. A woman who cried was called manipulative. A woman who stayed silent was condemned anyway. And so most women vanished quietly, out of history, out of memory, out of Rome. Innocence didn't matter, not really. Perhaps the most chilling part of this system is how little truth mattered. You could be accused for political convenience, for financial gain, for revenge, for marrying poorly, or simply for not bearing enough children. And once accused, the result was often the same. Guilt was assumed, punishment was swift, and the story stopped being yours. A system that punished women to protect men. Let's step back for a moment. Why was this system so ruthless? Because Roman society wasn't protecting morality, it was protecting male power and inheritance. A faithless wife threatened family trees, and family trees determined wealth, land, and legacy. So Rome chose cruelty, not because it didn't know better, but because it worked. It maintained the illusion of order. It reminded all women of their place, and it reassured every Roman man that his name, his children, and his pride were protected, even at the cost of justice. Conclusion. A whisper was all it took. In ancient Rome, a whisper could end a woman's life. No crime needed to be committed. No evidence needed to be shown. just the accusation. That's all it took. And as her body faded into exile, or her name was erased from marble, the men who judged her returned to their homes, to their slaves, to their courtesans, to their wives, who now knew what silence was worth. In Section 8, we'll explore whether any of this ever changed. Did Rome ever learn to question its double standard, or did the system only adapt, quietly, cleverly, to survive? Sleep softly until then.
Did Rome ever try to fix the double standard? The storm of accusations has passed. The whispers have faded from the atrium walls. The woman is gone, exiled, disgraced, or quietly erased. The husband has remarried. Society resets itself. But you, dear listener, are still here, watching, wondering. Did it ever change? Did Rome ever try, even once, to fix its brutal double standard? Did someone, somewhere in that empire of scrolls, swords, and silence, decide that women deserved justice too? Let's take a soft step forward and gently unfold the quiet truth. First, the law stayed unchanged for centuries. Let's start with the hard truth. From Augustus onward, the lex Julia de adulteries stayed firmly in place. The law that criminalized female adultery while allowing male promiscuity remained on the books well into the later empire. Emperors came and went. Philosophers debated the stars. Cities were burned and rebuilt, but the law, it endured. Even in times of reform, even under emperors who wanted to modernize Rome, this law stayed sacred. Because it wasn't just a law, it was a symbol, a signal that Roman morality, no matter how contradictory, was to be preserved. And no one wanted to be the leader who dared to say, maybe women deserved fairness too. But under the surface, people started whispering. Even if the law didn't change, something else did. Philosophers began to question the hypocrisy. Poets wrote verses mocking the severity of exile. Satirists joked about the foolishness of men who condemned their wives but chased courtesans in secret. Writers like Juvenal and Martial didn't challenge the system outright, but their sarcasm cut deep. A line from Juvenal practically sneers, "Your wife is the only one punished, but your hand is never empty of a cup, nor your bed of company." The cracks were appearing, not in the stone tablets of law, but in the minds of those reading them. Stoics, surprisingly, pushed for equality. One unlikely source of quiet revolution came from Stoic philosophers. These weren't radical firebrands. They were elite Roman thinkers, many of them men who believed deeply in self-discipline and moral consistency. And some of them began to argue, if a man must control his passions, then why is he allowed brothels and mistresses? If virtue is universal, why is chastity only demanded of women? Seneca the Younger, in particular, wrote about honor in a way that implied shared responsibility. He never directly condemned the double standard, but in his letters and moral essays, he quietly promoted restraint for both sexes. It wasn't activism. It was a whisper, but in Rome, even a whisper was a start. Christianity, a new morality, a familiar problem. Then came the rise of Christianity,
By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Christian ideals were sweeping across the empire. Chastity, modesty, and sexual restraint were no longer just elite ideals, they were divine mandates. This changed everything and nothing, because Christian morality was strict, but not equal. Yes, Christian thinkers condemned adultery. Yes, they preached fidelity and restraint, but women were still viewed as morally weaker, more temptable, and more responsible for sin. The language changed, the punishment remained. The adulterous woman was now not just impure, she was a danger to the soul. And so, rather than face exile, she might now face eternal damnation. Rome hadn't reformed, it had just rebranded its cruelty. A curious shift in late imperial law. In the later centuries of the Roman Empire, particularly under Constantine and Theodosius, some reforms began to soften certain punishments. For example, exile could be reduced under special appeals. Some property rights were partially restored to accused women. Legal definitions of adultery began to narrow slightly, focusing more on unlawful unions than mere suspicion. But these were not equality-driven reforms. They were administrative adjustments, designed to simplify court procedures, to clean up inconsistent trials, to reduce the backlog of cases, not to protect women. And so the heart of the system, the belief that a man's legacy must be preserved at any cost, remained untouched. Some women found workarounds, but quietly. In the absence of reform, some women adapted. Wealthy women began arranging private legal advisors to challenge exile orders. Some formed quiet alliances with other families, securing witnesses and building counter-accusations before anything happened. But these were not systemic victories. They were acts of survival. No laws changed. No protections were written. No precedent was set. These women weren't seen as brave. They were seen as lucky or scandalous. The fall of Rome didn't end the standard. It spread it. And then Rome fell. But the idea that women's sexuality was dangerous and had to be policed didn't fall with it. Instead, it passed into the laws of the kingdoms that rose in Rome's wake. Byzantium maintained much of Roman legal tradition, including laws punishing female adultery. Medieval Europe absorbed Roman inheritance fears, church purity laws, and patriarchal courts. Even early Islamic and Christian legal frameworks wrestled with similar double standards built on echoes of Roman order. So in a way, Rome didn't fix the standard, it franchised it. The double standard became a cultural export, wrapped in new language, but still just as sharp. So did Rome ever try to fix it? Not really. There were no bold reforms, no great senator who stood up and demanded justice, no empress who overthrew the court to protect her sisters. There were whispers, adjustments, quiet disobediences, but not change. Because Rome, like many empires, believed that hierarchy was natural, and to question male supremacy was to question the very bones of the republic. They didn't fix it, they protected it. Conclusion: the system didn't collapse, it just hid. And so we arrive at the quietest part of the story. By the end of the Roman Empire, women still faced exile for rumors. Men still visited brothels without shame. Scribes still copied the same scrolls about honor and control. But fewer people believed it. They followed the rules, but they stopped trusting them. They enforced the laws, but they whispered about hypocrisy behind closed doors. The system didn't collapse. It just faded into other systems, new kingdoms, new churches, new codes, all haunted by the ghost of Roman control. In Section 9, we'll take a closer look at how these ancient expectations shaped generations to come. What happened when people tried to return to Rome's ways, centuries after it fell?
how later generations tried and failed to imitate Rome's morality. Centuries pass, Rome collapses under its own weight, invaded, divided, and finally scattered like ashes into the winds of history. But its laws, its attitudes, its rules about women, sex, and control, they do not die. They linger like faint whispers in the cathedrals of medieval Europe, in the palace courts of kings and popes, in the inked pages of new moral codes. The empire fades, but its shadow remains. And now, dear listener, we walk quietly through the long echo that followed Rome, watching how later generations tried to resurrect her cold ideals, often without realizing what they were reviving. Let's dim the lights and step forward together. The Roman template, rewritten, not forgotten. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE, what remained was a puzzle of rising kingdoms, warlords, and fledgling churches. And in this chaos, order was craved desperately. And so Rome was remembered, not in full, not in marble or Latin verse, but in fragments. Its laws were copied into canon law by early church authorities. Its views on sexuality were embedded into Christian morality. Its structure of patriarchal control seeped into feudal contracts, inheritance laws, and church courtrooms. Rome's obsession with controlling women's bodies, punishing infidelity, and preserving male legacy found new life. This time not under emperors, but under bishops and kings. Medieval Europe, inheritance anxiety returns. By the 11th and 12th centuries, Europe was a landscape of feudal estates, knightly titles, and bloodlines more fragile than ever. And just like Rome before them, these new rulers feared one thing above all: illegitimate children. A nobleman's lands could not go to a bastard. A king's throne could not pass through uncertain blood. A widow's dowry had to remain pure. And so women were once again placed beneath scrutiny. Wives were locked in towers, cloisters, or castles. Daughters were wed in political arrangements at barely pubescent age. And any suspicion of infidelity became a matter of life or death. The ghost of Roman morality had returned, this time wearing a crusader's cloak. The Church embraced the double standard, quietly. Medieval Christian teachings preached chastity for all, but in practice, men were forgiven, women were punished. A husband who strayed was told to confess and seek absolution. A wife who strayed faced excommunication, public shaming, or honor killings by her family. The Church claimed all sins were equal before God, but only some were punished in court. Ecclesiastical tribunals judged women harshly, often with nothing more than hearsay or a jealous husband's word. Just like in Rome, accusation became proof, and just like in Rome, the woman disappeared through cloister, execution, or exile. Adultery became a crime, but only if you were a woman. Across Europe, secular laws in kingdoms from France to England criminalized female adultery, while ignoring male infidelity entirely. In medieval England, a woman found guilty could be imprisoned or forcibly placed in a nunnery. In Frankish territories, adulterous wives were sometimes executed with their lovers. In Germanic law, a wife's betrayal meant the loss of all dowry and children. Even when reforms emerged, as in the later Magna Carta or early Renaissance charters, the inequality persisted. It wasn't just tolerated, it was institutionalized. Because behind the laws, the fear remained. A man's wealth must pass to his child, and if his wife could not be trusted, the whole lineage was a lie. Courtesans were celebrated, wives were controlled. Just like in Rome, Renaissance Europe created a strange paradox. Courtesans in Venice,
Florence and Paris were celebrated for their wit, beauty, and influence. They advised dukes, entertained kings, and even wrote poetry. Meanwhile, wives lived in quiet obedience, scrutinized, restricted, and erased if scandal touched them. It was a rerun of Roman hypocrisy. The very men who legislated against female sexuality indulged it privately. Publicly moral, privately indulgent. A Roman echo, dressed in silk and powdered wigs. Witch hunts, the final form of gender control. Between the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe descended into its darkest inheritance of Rome's fear, the witch trials. Thousands of women, many of them unmarried, widowed, or simply outspoken, were accused of sexual sin with the devil. Their evidence? A dream, a miscarriage, a neighbor's grudge. This was Rome's suspicion of women, taken to apocalyptic extremes. Female sexuality was reimagined as supernatural threat. The independent woman became an enemy of God. The accused woman became the mirror of the adulterous Roman wife, guilty until burned. It was no longer about protecting family blood. It was about purifying society itself by any means necessary. The Enlightenment wasn't. Surely, you might think, the Enlightenment, this age of reason and science, corrected things. Not really. Thinkers like Rousseau still spoke of women as emotional, untrustworthy, and biologically suited to submission. Even revolutionary France gave voting rights to men and guillotines to women who stepped out of line. The idea that a man's honor was tied to a woman's chastity survived in law, literature, and custom. It was simply recast in philosophical prose instead of marble tablets. What about today? You may not like the answer. And now we arrive in the quiet modernity of today. And here's the unsettling truth. We still carry echoes of Roman morality. In divorce courts, where women are shamed for cheating, but men are shrugged off. In politics, where female figures are judged by their family lives and attire, while men are forgiven their mistakes. In religious teachings, where purity and modesty are disproportionately preached to daughters, not sons. In media, where slut and whore remain common insults, but male infidelity is often framed as weakness, not wickedness. Rome may be ruins, but its laws linger in our biases, our institutions, and our language. Conclusion: the mirror remains. Rome is gone. Its courts are dust. Its scrolls are broken. Its emperors are statues in museums. But the double standard? It's very much alive. It lives in expectations, in judgments, in the whispered shame passed from mother to daughter across centuries. Later generations didn't fix Rome's morality. They replicated it, refined it, repackaged it. And still, somewhere deep in our cultural bones, we carry that ancient belief that a man's betrayal is forgivable, but a woman's mistake must be fatal. In Section 10, we'll whisper gently through the ruins and ask one final question. What does it take to break the cycle once and for all?
What does it take to break the cycle? You've walked with us through the marble halls of Rome, through whispers in atriums, through law courts and exile scrolls, through the quiet footsteps of generations shaped by fear and double standards. Now we arrive at the quietest question of all. What would it take to stop it? Not just to reform a law, not just to update a doctrine, but to break a cycle so old, so embedded that it once wore a toga, then a crown, then a robe, then a suit. What does it take to silence the ghost of Roman hypocrisy for good? Let's walk gently. Step 1. Naming the ghost. Before you can dismantle something, you must see it. And for much of history, the double standard survived because it hid behind other names. Honor, tradition, family values, natural order. These weren't just convenient phrases, they were armor. Armor that protected a brutal imbalance. Armor that justified why women were policed, shamed, controlled. So the first step in breaking the cycle isn't legal, it's linguistic. It's teaching people that words like honor have been used to excuse violence, that chastity has often been a chain, that legacy has meant protecting male desire at the cost of female autonomy. To break a cycle, you name it, fully, clearly, loudly, even if history only whispered it. Step 2. Rewrite the rules, not just the penalties. In the modern world, many countries have technically erased sexist laws. Adultery isn't criminalized. Divorce is no longer fatal for women. Courts, in theory, treat infidelity equally. But the rules of culture haven't caught up. Women still face more judgment than men for sexuality. Girls are still taught to protect their purity. Cheating husbands are still called weak. Cheating wives are called everything else. The penalty may be lighter, but the unwritten rule remains. To truly break the Roman cycle, you must rewrite the expectations that men are entitled to pleasure, that women must be guardians of morality, that mistakes by men are forgivable, but mistakes by women are defining. The new scroll must say, everyone is responsible, everyone is free, everyone is equal. No exceptions, no clauses. Step 3. Center women in the telling of history. History has long been written by the survivors, and in Rome, the survivors were men. The stories we inherited, from Cicero's rhetoric to Tacitus's morals to Seneca's restraint, were shaped by male scribes. But what if we centered the women? What if we told the story of adultery not from the forum, but from the exile island, not from the courtroom, but from the bedroom? What if we imagined the silenced voices of Julia, of Octavia, of the countless unnamed wives banished with only their breath and shame? To break the cycle, you have to change the narrator. Let women's voices lead. Let their stories shape morality, not just suffer under it. Only then can we see the double standard not as tradition, but as trauma. Step 4. Educate without euphemism. One of the reasons the Roman mindset survived so long is because it was rarely questioned in schools, scripts, sermons, or textbooks. The brutality of moral control was softened, turned into euphemism. Ancient values, traditional marriage, proper womanhood. To break the cycle, education must stop whispering. We must say plainly, Rome punished women more harshly than men for the same acts. These ideas were absorbed into Western laws and religious systems. The ripple effect still affects us today.
It isn't about blame, it's about truth, and you cannot correct what you refuse to name. Step 5. Accept that fairness isn't always comfortable. Here's where the Roman legacy still fights back, because the double standard is comfortable for those it protects. A man who enjoyed being forgiven must now be accountable. A society that measured women by chastity must now reckon with real equality. Institutions built on silence must now speak. Fairness, real fairness, is uncomfortable. It means letting go of old power. It means accepting that some sacred traditions were unjust. It means listening, especially when it stings. Rome never dared do that, but we can. What would Rome say if it were listening? Let's imagine for a moment that Rome could speak, that the stones of the Senate whispered back, that the ghosts of exiled women, forgotten lovers, and prideful husbands could hear our question. Would they admit the cruelty? Would they laugh? Would they mourn? Maybe Rome would simply say what it always did. It was necessary. That's how empire survives, not through compassion, through justification. But we know better now, or at least we can. The cycle isn't just Roman, but Rome perfected it. Let's be clear, Rome didn't invent the double standard, but it refined it. It wrapped it in law, preached it in philosophy, spread it across continents. And that's why it's such a useful lens, because by studying Rome, we can see the shape of the cycle. We can trace its origin points. We can identify its disguises. And maybe, just maybe, we can undo it. One whisper at a time. Conclusion. Leave the scroll uncopied. If you followed this entire journey, slowly, sleepily, through the heart of Roman injustice, then here's the final thought I'll offer you. Every society copies something. Some copy Rome's glory, some its architecture, some its roads, its laws, its literature. But the cruelest thing you can copy is its silence, its failure to protect the powerless, its obsession with legacy over love, its ability to forgive men while destroying women. Let us be the generation that leaves the scroll blank, that ends the cycle, that listens, that questions, and when asked, centuries from now, what we did with Rome's legacy, let them say, we read it, we understood it, and we chose to do better. Thank you for joining this quiet rebellion through history. Sleep well, think deeply, and remember, the past only owns us when we refuse to look at it.